My daughter said, "You will be fine in the storage room. The main house has no space for you." I slept there for 5 nights. On the 6th night, I gave her an eviction notice. What happened next will shock you. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Samuel Smith from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I arrived at the gate with 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope, though I'd never have admitted it out loud. The gravel crunched under my boots the same way it had for 20 years, the old oak tree still leaning slightly left like it remembered me. The estate looked smaller somehow, but maybe that was just time playing tricks. My wife, Jean, used to stand on the porch waiting for me with a cup of coffee and a smile I never thought I'd lose. But now the house stood still, empty of her warmth. It wasn't just a house. It was our story carved into wood and concrete. I had returned to that story expecting the warmth of family. Instead, my daughter opened the door and didn't even hug me. Melissa stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, one hip cocked, her brows tight, like she was doing me a favor by acknowledging my existence. "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice clipped. Behind her, I saw her 2 kids run past the hallway, laughing carefree. I hadn't seen them in almost a year, not since Jean's funeral. Melissa didn't move aside to let me in. She glanced behind her, then turned back. "Listen, the main house is kind of packed right now. The kids each have their rooms, and Roger. He's been using the office to work from home since COVID." She looked me in the eye then, cold as stone. "You'll be fine in the storage room." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. The storage room? That little shed we used to keep tools and summer furniture? I stared at her, waiting for the laugh that never came. She pointed toward the side yard like she was directing a landscaper. I cleared out some space. "There's a cot and a lamp in there. It's temporary." She emphasized that last word like she was doing me a favor. I figured it's better than trying to bunk with the kids. Then she turned and walked back inside without offering to help with my bags. I stood there another 30 seconds, swallowing disbelief, then made my way to the shed. The storage room smelled like forgotten summers and mildew. It had one small window, covered in grime, and a spider web stretched proudly across the upper corner. There was a narrow cot with a threadbare blanket and a plastic bin doubling as a nightstand. The only source of light was a desk lamp plugged into an extension cord running under the doorframe. I set my suitcases down and sat on the cot. My knees cracked like old wood, and the cold metal frame groaned beneath me. I stared at the unfinished walls and tried to remember at what point in my life I had become an afterthought. That night, I didn't sleep. Not really. My bones ached from the hard mattress, and every creak of the wind outside reminded me I wasn't home. I was a guest in the place I helped build. Jean and I bought this land when Melissa was just a toddler. I'd spent weekends pouring concrete for the foundation, hammering in floors, learning plumbing from scratch because we couldn't afford a contractor. I worked extra shifts, gave up promotions to stay closer to home. And when Melissa turned 16, I handed her the keys to her first car and told her she'd always have a place here. I believed it then. I wanted to believe it now. But belief was starting to feel like a luxury I could no longer afford. The days blurred into each other. Melissa didn't check on me, not once. I'd hear her laughter echo through the house, music playing, the smell of breakfast wafting from the kitchen, but no plate ever came my way. I made myself peanut butter sandwiches from a jar I found in one of the bins. Once, her youngest, Ava, wandered into the yard and spotted me through the cracked door. "Grandpa," she said, eyes wide. Before I could answer, Melissa's voice rang out from inside. "Ava, get back in here." She never explained who I was or why I was out there. She pretended I didn't exist, and her children followed her lead. That kind of invisibility doesn't come suddenly. It's taught. On the 5th night, I overheard something through the thin shed wall. Roger was laughing. "I still can't believe you put your dad in the storage room," he said. Melissa replied, her tone dry and indifferent. "Well, he's not exactly company. Besides, he always let Mom handle everything. He's just there." They laughed again. That laugh, It lodged itself under my skin like a splinter I couldn't reach. I stared up at the exposed rafters of the shed and let it fester. That night, I didn't just lose sleep. I lost something deeper. Whatever hope I had left that maybe, somehow, I still had a daughter who loved me. I spent the next morning sitting on the edge of the cot, holding a cup of black coffee from the thermos I kept in my bag. The air was thick with silence. I stared at my hands, aged, veined, familiar. Hands that had held her as a baby, taught her how to ride a bike, walked her down the aisle. Now they trembled not from age, but from restraint. I couldn't yell. I couldn't cry, but I could act. I reached into my suitcase and pulled out the manila folder I'd kept sealed since Jean passed. Inside were the property documents, the joint ownership papers, and the deed that clearly stated the estate passed to me upon her death. Melissa never asked. She just assumed. But assumptions can be dangerous when they meet truth. That night, as I lay on the cot one last time, I rehearsed what I'd say. I wouldn't raise my voice. I wouldn't beg for respect. I would simply give her the truth on paper. The same way she gave me 5 nights of exile. 5 nights of feeling like a burden. I realized something then. This wasn't about space. It was about worth. And to her, I was worth less than a broom and a broken lawn chair. That was the moment I stopped being her father in my heart. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. By dawn, I had already printed the eviction notice at the library down the road. I made 2 copies. Folded one. Slipped it into a white envelope. My hand didn't shake when I wrote her name on the front. Melissa and Taylor. I even included a little note. This estate is not yours to claim. You have 30 days to leave. I tucked it into my jacket and sat quietly, waiting for the right moment. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't keep sleeping among spiders and regrets, pretending it was still a home. Sometimes, the only way to reclaim your dignity is to take back the house you once built with love, and this time, build something new from its ashes. The first morning in the storage room, I woke up stiff and cold, my back aching from the metal cot that had probably been salvaged from some forgotten summer camp. The blanket Melissa had given me barely covered my legs, and the air was thick with moisture. Each breath felt like I was inhaling mildew and dust. I sat up slowly, bones groaning louder than I did, and stared at the tiny window above my head. A single crack split across the glass, catching the morning light just enough to throw a crooked beam across the floor. That was the only warmth I had in that room. No heater, no proper insulation. Just me and the memories I'd brought with me. I kept waiting for the sting of it to wear off, for the disbelief to give way to some rational explanation, but it never did. The longer I sat there, the more I realized my daughter had made a decision, and I was expected to live with it. By the 3rd day, my pride had begun to rot just as much as the cardboard boxes lining the back wall. I avoided going into the main house unless absolutely necessary. Each time I walked in to use the bathroom or pour a glass of water, I felt like an intruder. Melissa never spoke more than a few words to me. Usually a clipped, "Hey," or, "Can you not leave your shoes by the door?" Roger, her husband, acted like I was invisible. I caught him giving me side glances when I passed through the kitchen, like I was a ghost that unsettled the house. Their kids didn't say hello, didn't ask questions. Melissa never introduced me as their grandfather, and I started to wonder if they even knew who I was. It was one thing to feel forgotten. It was another to be erased entirely. I kept quiet those days. Not because I lacked things to say, but because I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe she was overwhelmed, still grieving her mother, still adjusting to the house, without Jean's calming presence. But the truth crept in slowly, like water seeping through foundation cracks. It wasn't grief. It was choice. She chose to keep me out. She chose to make me small. I would sit on the edge of that cot, listening to the sound of laughter coming from the main house. The kids playing video games, Melissa talking on the phone, Roger watching football like I hadn't just buried my wife 3 months ago and come here looking for family. I wanted to believe she was still my daughter, but the version of her I had known seemed buried alongside Jean. I remember one afternoon in particular. I walked into the house to grab something warm to drink because the chill had settled deep into my joints. I passed the kitchen just as Melissa was pouring juice for the kids. She looked up, startled to see me. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "Can you not walk in when the kids are eating?" I blinked, unsure I heard her right. "You don't want me in the kitchen?" I asked. She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "I just don't want them to get confused. They don't really know you, Dad. It's awkward." I stood there in stunned silence, then turned around and walked back to the shed without a word. I didn't drink anything that day. Didn't eat either. My appetite had vanished with her last sentence. By the fourth night, the cold wasn't just physical. It was in my chest, thick and slow, like frost forming around my ribs. I couldn't understand how we had gotten here. I raised that girl, took her to school when Jean worked nights, helped her study for college entrance exams, paid for the braces, the dance classes, the overpriced prom dress she just had to have. When she got pregnant unexpectedly, I stood by her even when Roger hesitated. I gave her more second chances than I'd ever given myself. And now she couldn't even offer me a place on the couch, couldn't spare a word of kindness or a cup of tea. That kind of ingratitude doesn't just bruise, it hollows. Then came the worst moment of all, something that left me breathless, not because of what was said, but because of what it revealed. I was sitting outside on the back step of the storage room, watching the sunset. It used to be my favorite view. The lights spilling over the trees, the soft chirp of crickets starting up for the night. Jean and I would sit there with mugs of coffee and talk about the future. Now it was just me, alone, holding a chipped mug of lukewarm water. That's when I heard Roger's voice drifting through the open window of the living room. "So, what's the plan with your dad? He's not seriously staying long-term, is he?" Melissa answered with a chuckle that felt like a knife. "No, of course not. He'll get tired of it soon. He's not exactly resilient. He's just playing the quiet martyr card. Like always." They laughed. Together. Like that was funny. Like I was nothing but a burden with a martyr complex. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I laid down on the cot and stared at the ceiling, teeth clenched so tight I thought they'd crack. I thought about Jean. What she'd say. What she'd do. She'd be heartbroken, but she'd also be furious. Jean never tolerated disrespect. She never let Melissa get away with that bratty tone she developed in her 20s. She'd tell me to stand up for myself, to remind Melissa where she came from, and whose name was still on the deed of the house she now walked through like a queen. That's when it hit me. I didn't need Melissa's permission to reclaim my dignity. I didn't need to beg for space in a house I legally owned. And I damn sure didn't need to be spoken about like I was some pitiful relic parked in the back lot. The fifth night, I packed one of my bags. Not to leave, but to prepare. I folded my clothes neatly, placed my toiletries back in the side pouch, and zipped it shut. I didn't know what Melissa would say when I handed her the notice, but I no longer cared. This wasn't revenge. This was accountability. She wanted to act like I was a guest? Fine. Guests can be asked to leave. I didn't pace or rehearse or second-guess myself. I just sat there, breathing slow, letting the rage settle into something more useful, resolve. It wasn't about getting even. It was about getting out, from under her roof, her control, her contempt. That night, I didn't sleep much. But for the first time in 5 days, I felt something close to peace. The kind of peace that comes not from comfort, but from decision. I had made mine. And by this time tomorrow, Melissa would know exactly who she had underestimated. The morning of the 6th day, I stood up from the cot before the sun had risen, feeling every hour of my age but none of its patience. My hands were steady, though a faint tremble passed through my right wrist like a warning whisper. I ignored it. This wasn't the kind of day where hesitation had a place. I reached under the cot, pulled out the folder that had lived buried beneath my suitcase, and set it on my lap like it was sacred. Inside was the truth, the legal truth. The kind that didn't beg for acknowledgement, but demanded it. Melissa had never asked about the ownership of the estate. She assumed, like most people who never had to earn what they had. But assumption, I've learned, has a funny way of turning smug people into fools. The deed was still crisp, the ink unblemished. My name, printed clearly as a co-owner beside Jean's, stared back at me like a lifeline. After Jean passed, the property defaulted to me, her husband and legal partner. Not Melissa, not Roger, not anyone else. The title transfer had gone through without a hitch. Jean and I had made sure of it years ago, When we first sensed the change in our daughter, the entitlement creeping in like mold under the wallpaper. Just in case, Jean had said, tucking the documents into our fireproof safe. Because love doesn't always come with gratitude. At the time, I'd brushed her off, thinking she was being too cynical. Now, I saw it as foresight. The kind that only comes from knowing exactly what your child is capable of. I took my time preparing the envelope. White, unmarked, clean. I didn't scribble her name like I was angry. I wrote it slowly, clearly, Melissa and Taylor. I didn't want her to misread anything. I slid the printed eviction notice inside, along with a copy of the deed and a typed note that read, "This estate is not yours to claim. You have 30 days to vacate." I reread it twice, not out of doubt, but because I wanted to make sure the words landed exactly as intended. It was simple, legal, cold, perhaps, but no colder than the cot she'd offered her father while she slept on a California king bed under central heating. When I walked up to the house that morning, the air was already heavy with late summer heat. The lawn sprinklers clicked rhythmically, watering grass that didn't deserve to be so green. I knocked on the front door. Melissa opened it wearing a robe and a look of practiced inconvenience. "What is it?" she asked, like I was a neighbor asking to borrow her Wi-Fi. I held out the envelope without a word. She looked at it, then at me, then back at the envelope like it might explode. "What's this?" she asked, her voice already losing its edge. I didn't answer. I turned around and walked away before she could open it in front of me. I didn't want to see her face contort. I wanted her to read it in silence, the same way I had slept in silence for 5 nights while she played house in a place that wasn't hers. I hadn't even reached the shed again when I heard the front door slam open. "Are you kidding me?" Melissa's voice cracked through the yard like a whip. I turned, slowly, calmly. She was standing on the porch, paper in hand, her face pale and stunned. "You're evicting me?" Her voice was shrill, incredulous. "This is a joke, right? You can't seriously." "Dad, you can't do this." She stormed down the steps, barefoot, the hem of her robe dragging across the concrete. "This isn't your house. This was Mom's. She left it to me," she shouted. I didn't blink. "She left it to me," I said, holding up the second copy of the deed. "I own this house, Melissa. You've been living here because I let you." That sentence broke something in her face. She stopped a few feet from me, breathing hard, her hands shaking. "You're kicking out your own daughter?" she asked, voice cracking into something wet and pathetic. "Your grandchildren live here." I nodded. "Yes. And I spent 5 nights in a storage room because you said the main house had no space. So now, I'm making space." Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't know where to go with it. Victimhood doesn't have a backup plan when it meets evidence. "You don't mean this," she whispered. "You're just mad." I stepped forward, just enough to make her take a step back. "No, Melissa. I meant this the moment you looked me in the eye and told me the storage room was where I belonged." The next hour was chaos. She called Roger, who came home from work in a rage, puffed up with false bravado. "You think you can throw us out? This is our home," he yelled. I handed him a copy of the notice. "It's not. And I can." He cursed under his breath, pacing, but when I reminded him that all utilities were still in my name and that I had every legal right to reclaim the house, he went quiet. Melissa tried a different tactic, tears. "I just lost Mom," she sobbed. "And now I'm losing everything else." I wanted to feel something then. Pity, compassion, maybe even doubt. But all I felt was the phantom ache of 5 sleepless nights and a fatherhood turned hollow. "You lost me," I said softly, "the moment you stopped treating me like I mattered." Word spread fast, faster than I expected. By the end of the day, I had 3 missed calls from relatives I hadn't heard from in years. One voicemail from Melissa's cousin, Donna, was particularly venomous. "What the hell is wrong with you? You're throwing your family into the street." She didn't ask what had happened. Didn't ask where I'd been sleeping or how Melissa had treated me. She heard Melissa's version. Tears, half-truths, and conveniently missing details. That night, as I sat in the shed listening to the fan rattle and hum against the wall, I realized Melissa had mastered the art of selective storytelling. She was raised on it. Knew how to twist things just enough to look like the wounded party. But this time, I had the paperwork to cut through the lies. Later, After the kids had gone to bed and Roger had locked himself in the den, Melissa came outside again. She stood at the door of the shed, not entering, just lingering. "You really aren't going to change your mind?" she asked, her voice stripped of pride. I looked up from the book I wasn't reading. "No," I said. "I've already compromised enough." She nodded, slowly, and for the first time, she looked small, not physically, but spiritually, like someone who finally understood the cost of her own entitlement. "Can I at least have more than 30 days?" she asked. "You've had years," I said. 30 days is generous." She left without another word, her shoulders sagging under the weight of consequences she never imagined would come. And me, I finally slept that night. Not because it was comfortable, but because, for the first time in a long time, I had made myself heard. The morning after Melissa received the eviction notice, the air in the house changed. Not physically, no furniture was moved, no doors were slammed. But spiritually, it was as if someone had cracked the porcelain mask she wore, and now we could all see the pieces. She walked around the kitchen slower, more careful with her voice, no longer snapping at the kids for leaving cereal boxes open or groaning when Roger forgot to take the trash out. I watched her through the shed window while sipping black coffee that tasted like defiance. She wasn't changed. She was calculating. That's the thing about people like Melissa. When control slips through their fingers, they don't ask how they lost it. They scramble to perform pain until someone tells them they're right. By noon, the calls began. First, it was Aunt Joanne, Jean's sister, who hadn't spoken to me since the funeral. "What the hell is going on?" she asked, as if Melissa had been kidnapped, not gently ushered toward adulthood by a piece of notarized paper. She called me in tears. "Charles said you're kicking her out of her own mother's home." Her voice had the same sharpness Jean's once had, but none of the warmth. I took a breath and explained the deed. The shed, the 5 nights of silence, the cot, the storage room with one blanket and a lamp that barely worked. Joanne didn't respond immediately. "Still," she said finally, "you're her father." That was the line everyone kept using, as if fatherhood meant eternal forgiveness no matter how sharp the blade my child held to my dignity. Then came the texts from cousins, nieces, even an old church friend who barely knew Melissa. They all had something to say. Some were gentle. "Hey, just checking in, heard something crazy," and others were blunt. One cousin sent, "How can you live with yourself?" No one asked what I had lived through. No one asked what kind of daughter sticks her father in a moldy room like a forgotten piece of furniture. To them, evictions sounded like cruelty. They didn't realize it was mercy compared to what I could have done. I could have thrown her out the day after the funeral. I could have changed the locks before I ever came back. But I gave her time. I gave her space. And she used both to shrink me down into a man she thought wouldn't fight back. Melissa didn't stop at relatives. By the end of the second day, she had gone online. A vague Facebook post appeared. "When the person who raised you turns their back on you, it hurts in places you didn't know existed." The comments rolled in fast. "You deserve better. That's disgusting. Family should never do that. Praying for strength and peace, sis." She liked every one of them. She didn't mention my name, didn't describe what really happened, just painted herself as a grieving daughter who had been betrayed by the one man left in her life. And it worked. People love a good victim story, especially when it's vague enough to fill in the blanks with their own wounds. But what she didn't count on, what she never saw coming, was the few who knew better. Carla, my niece from Jean's side, posted a comment that sliced through the sympathy like a razor. "Sometimes the people who cry loudest are the ones who cause the storm." Maybe there's more to this story. That comment got buried under dozens of replies defending Melissa, but I saw it. I saw it, and I sat in the shed smiling for the first time in a week. Someone remembered who I was before Melissa decided to rewrite me into the villain. Someone remembered I wasn't always the man in the back room. I had once been the foundation of this family, even if that foundation had been walked on until it cracked. Melissa confronted me on the third day, standing just outside the shed again like she was afraid to enter holy ground. "Why are you letting people believe these lies?" she asked, her voice trembling more from frustration than sorrow. "You know this isn't what Mom would have wanted." I raised my eyes from the newspaper I wasn't reading. "You're right," I said. "Your mother would have never put me in a shed." She flinched at that, just a flicker, but I saw it. I made a mistake, she mumbled. I just didn't think it would be a big deal. You're always so quiet. I thought you didn't mind. That was the first time she used the word mistake. But it came too late, dressed in excuses instead of humility. You don't get to rewrite history, I said. I was quiet because I loved you, not because I didn't feel the cold. Roger, for his part, had gone silent since the initial confrontation. He no longer puffed his chest or raised his voice. He passed me in the driveway without a word, eyes fixed on his phone, as if silence could keep him from having to reckon with the truth. I didn't care. Roger was never the problem. He was just an echo. Melissa was the voice. She had the power, and she used it recklessly. She used it because she assumed love meant immunity. Because she thought she could hurt me and still be safe in the house I paid for, walked through, built with my bare hands when she was still in diapers. By the 5th day, she stopped trying to fight me directly. Instead, she turned passive. She started cooking meals big enough for 3, leaving plates out with my name written on Post-it notes. I didn't touch them. I wasn't starving for food. I was starving for remorse. And she hadn't served that once. She folded my laundry and left it outside the shed. I left it there until the wind blew it off the chair. She started telling the kids to greet me, to call me Grandpa. They did it shyly, unsure, like they'd just been told I wasn't a stranger after all. I answered them kindly, but I didn't step inside. Not yet. Not while the rot was still fresh. I spoke to a lawyer that week, just to be sure. He confirmed what I already knew. Melissa had no claim to the house, and the eviction was valid. I had protected her for years, and now I was protecting myself. Just make sure you're emotionally ready for the fallout, he said. I laughed. I'd been living in fallout since the day Melissa decided my grief was less important than her comfort. The only thing I wasn't ready for was the silence that would follow once she finally left. But I'd take that silence over her performance any day. As the 30-day clock ticked down, Melissa became 2 people. 1, the wounded daughter, parading her regret through Facebook and texts to distant relatives. The other, a passive tenant, trying to win me back with politeness wrapped in manipulation. But I had seen both faces too clearly now. I wasn't looking for apology. I was looking for peace. And peace doesn't come from pretending things didn't happen. It comes from saying, this is what you did, and this is what it cost you. The final week came on quiet feet, like a thief too polite to make noise while it emptied out the home. Melissa no longer stormed or pleaded. She moved slowly through the house, boxing things room by room, a soft tension hanging over everything like mist. It was strange to watch, my daughter packing up her life not in shame, but in a deliberate kind of disbelief. Like she still thought, deep down, that if she moved slowly enough, I'd change my mind. She was careful to leave doors open, lights on, as if I might peek in and see something that softened me. But I had seen enough. The cot in the storage room, the untouched dinners, the sound of my name never spoken in kindness. It had all played out in high definition, and no amount of slow motion could reverse it. I watched from the shed as the moving truck arrived, a dented white van driven by 2 men in matching shirts that read Easy Movers. Melissa stood on the porch, arms crossed, directing them like she was still the queen of a kingdom she'd lost. Roger followed behind her with a phone glued to his ear, barking into the receiver about temporary rentals and short-term leases. Their children stayed inside mostly, peeking through windows like ghosts watching their old life vanish in broad daylight. It wasn't dramatic. No one screamed. No one threw anything. But there was a heaviness that hung in the air. Like a funeral no one admitted was happening. I stayed back by choice. This wasn't a spectacle. This was closure, and it belonged to me. On the 3rd day of their packing, Melissa knocked on the shed door. I opened it halfway, enough to show I was willing to hear her, but not enough to let her in. We found a place, she said. Her voice was soft, almost rehearsed. It's not ideal, but it's something. I nodded, said nothing. She shifted her weight, glancing back toward the house. The kids are confused. They don't understand why we have to leave. Her eyes searched mine for some trace of guilt, something to grasp. But there was nothing left to give her. Maybe one day they will, I said, when they learn how families supposed to treat each other. She blinked, wounded by the fact that I hadn't offered a lifeline. But I was done being the rope she pulled herself up on just to forget I was holding it. Melissa tried one last time that evening. She knocked again, this time carrying a photo album. "I found this in the hall closet," she said. "Thought you might want it." I took it without a word. The cover was dusty leather, cracked at the edges. Inside were snapshots of her childhood, vacations, birthday parties, backyard barbecues where Jean held her in one arm and flipped burgers with the other. There were pictures of me, too. Lifting her on my shoulders, pushing her on swings, standing at her graduation with tears in my eyes and pride etched deep into my face. She pointed at one photo, a blurry Polaroid of us building the foundation of the house. "You taught me everything I know," she whispered. "And now you're shutting me out completely." I looked down at the photo, then back at her. "No, Melissa, you shut me out. The moment you decided I didn't belong. That was the last time she tried to reach me." The next 2 days passed in silence, just the noise of tape pulling off rolls, drawers being emptied, furniture legs bumping into door frames. She left my name out of her voice and her thoughts. I became the background again, but this time I didn't mind. It was peace. Real, undisturbed peace. I kept to myself, spent time in the garden Jean once loved, watering the tomatoes that still somehow thrived despite the neglect. Funny how some things hold on longer than they should. I thought about pulling them out, clearing the bed, but decided against it. Let them grow. Let them remind me that roots are stubborn and not always worth saving. On moving day, Melissa didn't say goodbye. Roger nodded at me once, curt and expressionless, before getting in the driver's seat of their SUV. The kids didn't look back. Melissa climbed into the passenger seat, staring straight ahead like if she didn't acknowledge me, none of it had happened. That was fine. I didn't need a goodbye. I didn't want closure in the form of tears or last-minute hugs. I wanted peace. I wanted silence. I wanted to walk through the front door of my own home without feeling like I needed permission. And that's exactly what I did once they were gone. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Not bad, but unfamiliar. Candles and air fresheners I never bought. A cinnamon scent that clung to the furniture like a disguise. I walked slowly through the house, touching the walls like they might crumble. Each room echoed slightly, emptier now, but lighter too. The living room was spacious again, the hallway clear of toys and school bags. I opened the windows and let fresh air rush in, sweeping out the ghost of Melissa's dominance. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, hands flat on the counter. This room had once been Jean's pride. Gleaming tiles, warm lighting, handwritten recipes stuck to the fridge. Now it was mine again, and I didn't feel guilty for that. Not anymore. That night, I slept in the master bedroom for the first time since Jean died. The bed still had our old frame, solid oak with a mattress that remembered us. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. No footsteps overhead. No muffled voices behind doors. Just me, the creak of old floorboards, and the distant hum of crickets outside. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just breathed, slow and deep, like someone finally allowed to exhale. For the first time in weeks, my bones rested without bracing. My chest loosened. My fists uncurled. The war was over. Not won, perhaps, but over. In the days that followed, neighbors came by, curious. Mrs. Lang from across the street brought banana bread and avoided the topic entirely. "Just thought you could use some company," she said. I accepted the bread and the silence. Others weren't so delicate. One man, a friend of Roger's, came by asking if what he'd heard was true. "You kicked out your own daughter?" he asked. I met his eyes. "No," I said. "I reclaimed my home." He didn't know what to say to that, so he left. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always invite conversation. Sometimes, it just sits there, unmoved by your opinion of it. I didn't reach out to Melissa. I didn't block her, either. I let time do what it does best, expose what words never could. I knew she'd tell people whatever version suited her. But I also knew, eventually, someone would ask her the hard questions. Someone would wonder why a man who raised her, housed her, paid her bills for years would suddenly cut the cord. And when that question came, she'd have to look at herself, maybe for the first time. Whether or not she liked what she saw was no longer my concern. In the weeks that followed Melissa's departure, The house settled into a kind of silence that didn't hurt. It healed. The air was still, yes, but not tense. There were no more footsteps above my head, no murmurs behind closed doors. The refrigerator no longer groaned under the weight of takeout containers, and the television didn't run constantly in the background like static noise to distract from real conversations that never happened. I moved through the house like a man reclaiming something sacred. Each room held echoes of the past, but they didn't haunt me. They reminded me that this house, even in its quietest state, had more warmth than it did when Melissa tried to fill it with her noise. I took my time restoring things, not just the furniture or the decor, but the feeling. I took down the digital prints she hung in the hallway and replaced them with framed photos Jean had loved. I unpacked a few of Jean's old knickknacks from the attic, ceramic birds, a woven rug we'd bought during our anniversary trip to Santa Fe. I didn't do it all at once. I didn't treat it like a project. I treated it like mourning, like tending to a garden of memories that needed careful watering. There was a rhythm to it. Wake up, open the blinds, make coffee, sit in silence. And in that silence, something bloomed. Not forgiveness, not yet, but clarity. A kind of peace that only grows in soil once scorched by betrayal. One morning, I found myself standing in front of the storage room. I hadn't touched it since the day Melissa left. The door still creaked when I opened it, the air inside stale and heavy with the ghost of those 5 nights. The cot was still there, though I'd folded the blanket neatly after moving out. The lamp sat crooked on the plastic bin, as if even it had resigned itself to dimness. I stood there for a long while, just breathing in the memory of it all. I didn't cry, but I did close my eyes and let the anger rise, then fall. I had been wronged. That much was clear, but I was done being angry. Anger had served its purpose. It gave me the strength to stand. Now, it had no home in me. I turned that storage room into something new. Jean had always wanted a greenhouse, somewhere to grow her herbs, maybe start tomatoes from seed. So I cleared the cobwebs, opened the window, scrubbed the mildew from the corners, and replaced the bulb with something bright and warm. I installed shelves along the walls and bought pots and soil from the garden center down the road. Slowly, the shed transformed from a place of exile into a place of purpose. It didn't erase what happened there, but it redefined it. Just like I was redefining myself, not as a father disrespected, but as a man restored. I never reached out to Melissa, but she reached out to me. Not in words, not in phone calls, but in small, strange ways. A letter showed up 2 weeks after she left. No return address, just my name written in a hand that tried to appear steady. Inside was a single sheet of paper. I don't understand why you're still angry. I thought time would make it better, but maybe it's just making you bitter. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was just tired. Tired of being the one who always had to carry everything. No apology. No ownership. Just a message soaked in self-pity. I read it once, folded it, and placed it in Jean's old recipe box, along with other things I used to think were sweet, but eventually went stale. I didn't show the letter to anyone. Some wounds are better kept private, not because I'm ashamed of them, but because I earned the right to heal without putting myself back on display. Carla came by now and then, bringing groceries or flowers, sometimes both. "You look better," she said one afternoon, handing me a paper bag full of produce. Less tense. I smiled and offered her tea. She didn't ask about Melissa. She didn't need to. Some people can read silence like a novel. She sat with me on the porch while I sipped my drink, and we listened to the wind rustle through the trees. For once, the quiet between 2 people didn't feel awkward. It felt earned. Every now and then, I thought about the kids. Ava and Ryan. They were too young to understand the mess they'd been living in. Too young to understand how one wrong decision by a parent can ripple into generations. I wrote them letters, short ones, filled with stories from their mother's childhood, funny memories, gentle truths. I didn't send them. I tucked them into a drawer. Maybe one day, they'd come looking. Maybe not. Either way, I needed to remember that love doesn't disappear just because it's unreturned. It shifts. It reshapes. It waits until it finds a place to land where it won't be squandered. I stopped checking Facebook. Stopped answering calls from distant relatives who wanted gossip but not truth. My story was mine, and I'd told it in the only way that mattered, through action. I didn't need to explain to the world why I reclaimed my house. I didn't need to defend my boundaries. If people wanted to believe I was cruel, let them. The only judgment that mattered was the man I saw in the mirror every morning, the one who no longer looked like a doormat. He looked tired, yes, but he looked whole, and that was enough. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the echo of her voice in the hall. Melissa, laughing, bossing people around, moving through the house like she was untouchable. And for a second, I ache. Not for her, but for the father I used to be, the one who believed that unconditional love would always be returned. That version of me is gone now, buried quietly under the weight of 5 nights in the cold and 1 eviction notice that changed everything. And I don't mourn him. I just nod at his memory and thank him for staying quiet long enough to find his voice. The house is quiet now, but it's not empty. It's full of the kind of peace that only comes after a storm, the kind that doesn't need loud apologies or grand gestures to prove its value. I make dinner in my kitchen. I water Jean's garden. I sit on the porch and watch the sunset, sometimes alone, sometimes with Carla, always at ease. This home is mine again. Not because of a deed, not because of a court, but because I stood up and reminded the world, and myself, that I deserved better than the storage room. Have you ever had to reclaim your dignity, even if it meant standing alone? This story wasn't just about a house. It was about a man who stopped letting love be an excuse for mistreatment. If you've ever been pushed aside by family or forced to draw a hard line for your own peace, share your story in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We tell the stories others are too afraid to say out loud, and yours might be next. See you soon in the next one.